Welcome to This Explainer, everyone. Today, we're tracking a lifeline that weaves straight through unforgiving deserts, completely defies geography, and, well, essentially birthed the modern world as we know it. We are talking about the Nile. But before we get into all that rich history, I want you to consider a crazy scenario for a second. What if all the water in the world just vanished today? Every river, every lake, just gone in a flash. How long do you really think human civilization could hold on? A few days? Maybe a couple of weeks if we're lucky? Okay, let's dive into this. 10,000. That is the number of years this single river has sustained humanity. 10,000 years. Without the Nile, the map of our world would be completely, utterly unrecognizable. We're talking no pharaohs, zero pyramids, and honestly, the entire course of human evolution might look completely different. Section 1. Mother of Civilization, the river that built Egypt. So, to really wrap your head around the Nile, you have to understand that it basically has two distinct hearts. First up, we've got the White Nile. This flows right out of Uganda's massive Lake Victoria. And when I say massive, I mean early explorers literally mistook this lake for an ocean. This branch gives the river its steady, year-round flow. But then we have the Blue Nile, which starts at Lake Tana in Ethiopia. And this is the secret sauce. The Blue Nile brings in 85% of the river's actual water, but way more importantly, it brings this deep, incredibly nutrient-rich black soil. When these two finally meet up in the city of Khartoum in Sudan, they merge into this unstoppable force that just marches relentlessly north to the Mediterranean. You know, the famous Greek historian Herodotus actually hit the nail on the head over 2,500 years ago when he wrote, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." And if you think about why that matters, it's pretty mind-blowing. Over 95% of Egypt is just pure, unforgiving desert. Without this river, the whole country would just be a lifeless expanse of sand. But because the river's annual flood cycles consistently delivered that rich black soil, which the locals called Kemet, it was quite literally worshipped. I mean, they even had a specific god of the flood named Hapi, simply because this river was the one and only reason they were able to survive. So, the river wasn't just, a giant watering hole. It was arguably humanity's greatest teacher. Because the ancient Egyptians absolutely had to predict when the floods were coming, what did they do? They invented the calendar. Because they had to measure out the flooded farmland, they developed early mathematics. They engineered these mind-bogglingly complex canal systems for irrigation. And those breathtaking pyramids? Well, scientists now believe the Nile acted as this massive natural highway. Millions of tons of stone were transported thousands of kilometers on boats, all without a single piece of modern machinery. The river quite literally did all the heavy lifting. Moving on to Section 2, Deep Mysteries of the River, Defying Nature and History. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the Nile completely defies our geographical expectations. First off, it flows essentially backwards compared to what we expect from most major rivers. It runs entirely from south to north, just because its source is perched at a much higher elevation. Second, and I find this wild, we are living in the 21st century and experts still debate its exact origin point. Some say it's tucked away in the forests of Burundi, while others are convinced it's in Rwanda or Tanzania. Third, geological records actually show that around 5.5 million years ago, during something called the Messinian salinity crisis, it dried up completely, no water at all. And finally, its depth. In some places, it plunges 26 meters deep. To put that into perspective, that is like an 8-story building completely submerged. Archaeologists actually believe there are countless ancient temples and statues just sitting there, buried in the mud at the very bottom. Next up, Section 3. Dangerous and Vibrant Ecosystem, Monsters of the Nile. Make no mistake, this river is ruled by two incredibly formidable apex predators. On one hand, you have the Nile crocodile. We're talking about a 6-meter, 1,000-kilo absolute unit with the strongest bite force of any animal on planet Earth. It was actually so feared that it was worshipped as the crocodile-headed god Sobek. But then, you have the hippopotamus. Now, they might look a little slow or clumsy, but they are actually Africa's deadliest large mammal. They can swim at 30 kilometers an hour, and they are notorious for aggressively flipping boats. It's just this brutal, constant reminder of the ecosystem's wild, untamed boundaries. And hey, the threats aren't just the ones that can walk on land either. Lurking right beneath the surface is the Nile perch. These fish grow up to 2 meters long, and they can weigh a staggering 200 kilograms. When you start to realize the sheer, unbelievable scale of the biodiversity hiding in these waters, it hits you that the Nile isn't just a river, it's an entire thriving universe unto itself. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into the modern era, dams and modern challenges, or man's attempt to control the river. The Aswan High Dam is this perfect, textbook example of the classic conflict, man versus nature. Built in 1970, it is an absolute marvel of engineering, standing 111 meters tall. It generates massive amounts of electricity, and for the first time, it controlled those terrifying ancient floods. But, as you can guess, there was quite a domino effect. Just to build it, UNESCO had to literally cut up the ancient Abu Simbel temples and move them 65 meters higher up a cliff just to save them from being swallowed by the new artificial lake. And here's the real kicker. The dam trapped all that beautiful nutrient-rich silt. So now that fertile black soil doesn't reach the farms anymore, which forces modern Egyptian farmers to rely heavily on artificial chemical fertilizers instead of the river's natural gifts. So the crucial point is that controlling this river has very severe modern consequences. And this leads us directly into one of the most tense geopolitical situations in the world today, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. Right now, Ethiopia is building Africa's largest dam on the Blue Nile. From their perspective, generating 6,450 megawatts of power is a completely valid, desperately needed engine for national development and pulling people out of poverty. But look at it from Egypt's side downstream. For them, it is a matter of absolute, literal survival. Over 100 million Egyptians rely on that exact same water just to live. Both sides have fundamentally undeniable needs here, making this a highly complex, unresolved friction point for the entire region. And that brings us to Section 5, Future Water Crisis, Climate Change, and the Sinking Delta. According to United Nations projections, climate change is poised to have a truly devastating impact on this river. As global temperatures rise and that crucial mountain ice in Ethiopia melts, we're actually going to see more flooding initially. But once that ice is gone, the river's flow could drop by a staggering 50% by the year 2050. Let that sink in. Half the river, just gone. In practical terms, that would mean unimaginable agricultural collapse and widespread food crises for the hundreds of millions of people who depend on it every single day. And unfortunately, the threat is coming from the ocean, too. You see, the Nile Delta, which is where roughly 60% of Egypt's farming actually happens, is slowly sinking. Why? Because the river isn't pushing out enough sediment anymore to hold the sea back. Meanwhile, global sea levels are steadily rising. Take Alexandria, for example. It's Egypt's second largest city, an absolute historical jewel, and it sits a mere 2 meters above sea level. Without immediate global climate action, the very waters that gave life to this entire region could quite literally swallow it whole. It really brings to mind this beautifully profound quote from an ancient Egyptian text: "The Nile is the breath of God." It's such a stark reminder of this ancient wisdom that we seem to have just forgotten. They inherently knew that human survival meant respecting and harmonizing with the natural world that sustains us. Because when we just take from nature without caring for it in return, well, the consequences can be catastrophic. And that leaves us with one final incredibly pressing question. Can humanity save the very river that birthed it? The pharaohs knew that without the Nile, there was absolutely nothing. Today, we really need to remember that exact same lesson. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, everyone. I really want to hear from you. What shocked you the most about the Nile's incredible history or its pretty terrifying future? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one where we unpack another fascinating topic.